So I'm going to demonstrate how to make a basic HTML page. So fortunately for you, I've already given you a template that starts out with a basic page. So you'll see in week 1 there's a file called skeleton.txt. I believe I also put this in another location. Yes, it's under course content. So you'll also see this under course content over here on the left hand side, course content, and it's also here. Now it is a txt file, so when you go to extract it, it's probably going to look like this. Let me see if I can pull that out so you can see that. So it's going to look like this. Now you can also download it, or you could just copy this if you wanted, and then we can paste it. But if you download it, I think that would be easier. So I'm going to see if I can do that. See if it'll let me download it. Now I'm in here as a teacher. So, well, let's see if I can. Yeah, I guess it's not. All right, so I'm just going to copy and paste this. So I'm going to copy this text, copy this. I'll do this the hard way. And then what you want to do is you want to install a program called Notepad++. So Notepad++, you don't have to use Notepad++, but if you're on a PC, or I believe it will also work on Linux. I don't think it works on, no, actually it looks like it's just unique to Windows. It does not work on Mac, which I don't think it does. So if you're on a Mac, a really good program for Mac is called Brackets. Brackets actually, I believe, will also work on Windows as well. I typically use Notepad++, but you could use, it doesn't really matter. You can use any text editor you want. So I don't think it's on a Mac, but so I have not downloaded this in a while, but so you could go grab any of the most recent downloads. Say you go 788, 787. You could try 789. Looks like it's more recent. I don't know how tested it is, but you want to download that and install it. And once you install it, it should look like this. So this is Notepad++. Notepad++ is basically a text editor like Notepad, but it's like Notepad on steroids because it has line numbers. You can see you can set it for many different types of languages. We're going to be using it for Notepad, for HTML. So I've copied that HTML from that page, and now I've copied it from this course content, and now I'm going to paste it in Notepad. Now this is a skeletal HTML file. You'll notice it doesn't change color or anything. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this guy right away. And I usually make a folder. I suggest you make a folder where all your code is housed and kept together in one place that you know where to find it. So I'm going to save this, and I have a million different folders, but I'm going to save this in a folder called practice code. Now, you may want to save it in a folder called CMIS176. You might want to save it in a folder called game creation, whatever works for you. But I would keep all your projects in a folder. So like, for example, in practice code, you can see I have a folder called asteroids. That's because there is a separate project that I have for asteroids. I have a folder called Bear Upstream Game. That's a project. And in there are other files like images, HTML files, etc. But this is just one single file. Actually, I'll go ahead and make a folder for this. And this is inside my other folder. And I'm going to call it ExampleONE. And I'm going to save in Example1. I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to call this example.html. Now, I know that's really, really small, and I don't think I can really enlarge that. But you want to make sure you end it in .html, because that is the language. Now, once I click Save, now you'll notice that it changes to this color coordination. Excuse me. So just to show you one more thing that's really, really important. So here's that practice code folder. I just made example1, and here's that HTML file. Now, if I would close this in Notepad, once I have that file, and once I have Notepad++ installed, I can right-click, and I can edit with Notepad++, which is a really easy way to go right back into the file. So I can edit with Notepad++. Now this is a skeletal file to get me started. What I want to do is I want to start to add some HTML content to this. So you can add some simple HTML. I could do something like an H1, and this is an H1, this is not an L, and I could say something like this is my first JavaScript file. Now, this is not JavaScript yet, but it's going to be, and I'm going to close that H1 tag. So these are tags in HTML. A tag, those tags have an opening and a close. You can see here's an HTML tag that closes here. So this /, this little / here, indicates a close tag. Not all HTML tags have a close tag. Most of them do. There are a few that are self-closing tags. They open and close in one line, but most HTML tags have an opening and a close. Here's a head tag that opens, here's where it closes. Here's a body tag that opens, here's where it closes. Also notice that I have indented, you can see where I've indented in where the head tag, because the head is inside the HTML, body is inside HTML. Just like we as a person, we all have a head and a body walking around, same kind of deal. So if I save this right now, I'm going to save it, and I want to see what this looks like in a browser. Now I've set mine up so I can go to run and I can launch in a particular browser. I have another video later that shows how to add this utility if it doesn't come up on your computer. But I want to launch this in Chrome, and when I do that, this is what I see. Here's what that page is going to look like in my browser. So it just says this is my first JavaScript file, and that's because that is that H1 that's coming up. That's what I'm seeing there. But I don't really want to do simple HTML. What I really want to lead up to ultimately, this class is game creation. So we need to lead up to how does JavaScript work with this. So you'll see in several different videos I show some HTML things like comments, which is really, really important for you because your projects should have comments at the top. And you'll see where I make a video and I show you how to do HTML contents, and I'll share that with you. You'll see that in week 1. I also do a little bit of CSS. CSS is the presentation of HTML, and I give a video on some simple CSS. Those are some things that are some common things you want to know, just some basic things about HTML and CSS. But this class is to do some JavaScripting using JavaScript to create games. So JavaScript kind of works inside HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this H1, and I'm going to say so you'll see what this means here in a little bit. So I'm going to create a form. I'm going to create a form that is going to open, and I'm going to go down a few lines and close. So notice for these brackets, these are angle brackets greater than less than signs. These are important. They have to be angle brackets. And I'm going to go inside my form, so I'm going to hit the tab key once, and I'm going to create a label. A label is just a static word that just sits there inside the form, because I'm going to use this form to get information. And then on the next line, or the next thing next to the label, I'm going to do an input tag, and this input is going to have an attribute of type, and that type is going to be a text. So I'm going to use an equal sign, double quote, and I'm going to ask for text type. This input also is going to have an ID, some kind of identifier, and I'm just going to do txt person. Now, an input tag itself is its own, it is content. So this is a self-closing tag. This is one of the few tags that does not have an open and a close. So form has an open and a close. Label has an open and a close. But input, you can see this / at the end here. That's because it itself is its content. So the user can type inside this little input box. So I'm going to save this and see what this looks like in the browser. So I did a save, and you can see what happens with Notepad++ is this little save icon, this floppy disk icon is red, means I've made some changes and I would need to save after I made those changes. So once I save it, this will go gray, and then this icon as well will go gray. I can click on this icon, or I can do Control S. So I'm going to launch this in the browser. A shortcut way to do that, I'm launching in Chrome, which I suggest you use, is Control-Alt-Shift-R. Control-Alt-Shift-R. And now I can see here's that input box for the person. All right, I could also refresh this page as well if I wanted. All right, so I'm not done. I'm going to go back and add a couple more things here. I'm going to add a button tag. And a button is going to have an attribute called onClick. It's basically that says what's going to happen when the user clicks this button. And I'm going to add to it inside quotes something called new person with a left and right parenthesis. That's really important. Make sure you get this exactly as you see it. I, the developer, I'm coming up with this ID name. I'm coming up with this name. This is a function name. I'm going to have a JavaScript function. A function is a mini process that does some subroutine. And I know it's a function because of the parentheses. So I am naming this function. I'm deciding to call it new person. And this button tag is of type button. So I'm not done with the button tag. I'm going to have a button that says change person. And this will make more sense here in a little bit. And then I'm going to close the button tag. So this button will also be inside the form, and you can see that because it's indented inside the form, and the form closes here. So I'm going to save this, Control S save. I'm going to go to my Chrome browser and refresh this, and now I can see that button. Now if I wanted to make this look prettier, I could add a couple break tags. This is just a common simple tag to go down to the next line. I'm going to add a couple of these just to go down to the next line, make it look a bit nicer. Oh, and I didn't close my button tag properly. I did something weird there. I see. So I need to close that properly, make that look right. Okay, so now what's going to happen, the user can type in their name, you can click change person, and it will change the output. So what I don't have is I don't have the output that's going to change. So I'm going to add, after my form, I'm going to add a div tag that's going to have an ID, and that ID is going to be called who passes. So I, the developer, I am coming up with the ID, the identifier name for this div, and then I'm immediately going to close that div. And inside here, well, I'll just leave that blank for now. That's fine. All right, so really what's going to happen is what the user types in for this ID, when they click new person, then we're going to have JavaScript, which is all going to be placed up here, that's going to change what displays in this div. Right now, there's nothing in that div. So right now, I can refresh my page. There's actually a div tag right here, but there's nothing in it. But there will be something there when we run our JavaScript, which we don't have our JavaScript, which we're going to do now. So up inside head, this is after our meta tag. I'm going to add another tag. This is inside the head tag. This must be after the head tag starts and before it closes. I'm going to add a script. Oops, not, it's going to be lowercase. A script. a script tag. Now, it used to be you had to set the type to the script tag, but now it's automatically assumed it's going to be JavaScript. And I want to close this script tag because it has to have an open and a close, and I want to close it before I close head. So the order of these are really important. Everything I do now in between here and here, everything I do now between here and here is going to be in JavaScript land. So now I'm doing HTML language with these tags, but inside script tag, inside the script tag, inside before where it opens and closes, what's inside here is JavaScript language. So I'm going to tab in, and I want to do a function. Notice that Notepad++ recognizes this is script language here, so it's doing a little bit different markup and display. I'm naming this function new person because that's what I called it here. It has to match exactly, upper, lowercase, everything has to match, and I'm adding a set of parentheses. After the parentheses, I'm going to add a left curly bracket. So these are sets of curly brackets. Curly brackets on your keyboard is right above enter to the right of P. So Notepad++ automatically knows that I need these to come in pairs. So I want this left curly bracket here, and I want the right curly bracket a few lines later. So I'm just going to add a few blank lines here. So now what I do between this left curly bracket and right curly bracket, what I do here is inside my JavaScript function, I'm going to create a variable, a var, called new p. That's going to be short for new person. And this is going to be assigned, one equal sign means assignment. This is going to be assigned what the document dot get element by ID, what that gets me for inside parentheses, inside double quotes, txt person, and then one more thing at the end of this, I need a semicolon. Whew, that's a lot to type. So what this means is the document is this file itself. It is the HTML file. And this says for this document, run a function that JavaScript understands called getElementById. So that means go grab the HTML element, the HTML tag, if you will, that is called text person. So somewhere in my HTML code, I have an ID called txt person, and it has to match exactly. What ID is called txt person? Right here. That's my input field. That's where the user types in. So this is going to go get what the user typed in, or what's in there. It could be nothing. Maybe the user didn't type anything. And then on the next line, I'm going to create a variable. I'm just going to call it output, and it is going to be assigned the document for get element by ID, and that has to match exactly capital E in element, capital B in by, capital I in ID. And inside these parentheses, I need to get an ID called who passes, and then a semicolon at the end. So now this says go find an element by ID called who passes. Well, where is that? Here it is. Here's who passes. So now this variable is going to be associated with this. Now there's nothing in there right now, but that's okay. This variable is now kind of connected or associated with that. All right, so I'm going to go down 2 more lines. And now what I want to do is I want to create a variable. This variable is going to be basically the variable that kind of works for me. And I'm just going to call this peep, and it's going to be assigned new p dot value. So really what happens here, I kind of misspoke. This actually just makes that connection. It doesn't really grab the data. It does sort of. It just makes the connection with it. This actually goes and grabs the data. This basically says, go look up what's in that box, what's in that input box. Go look up what's there and put it in the JavaScript variable called peep. So now peep is going to store what the user typed in. going to create one more variable, and I'm going to call this person passing, and it is going to be assigned a string, just a sentence that says who passed, whoops, cells class, question mark. And really what I'm doing here is I'm building a string. I'm going to do a plus. Now I'm running out of room here because I'm trying to give you full display of what's going on. So I'm going to go down to the next line. Actually, I'll see if I can do this in one screen. It just might get a little smaller, and I apologize for that because I think it'll make more sense. And I'm going to build a string. This plus means concatenate or continue your output. I'm going to continue with what's stored in this variable peep. And then I'm going to concatenate a little bit more to my output. I'm going to add an exclamation point and a little bit more output. Now see, it went down to the next line anyway. See if I can get that to stay on one line, because I think it'll look a little cleaner and make more sense. So this is a string. A string is just words, sentences, anything's fair game. Character spaces, weird symbols, question marks, anything's fair game for a string output. And I'm displaying who, space, pass, space, cells, space, class, question mark, space. Then continue my output with what is stored in peep, which should be what the user typed in. And then continue with an exclamation point, space, that's, space, who, exclamation point. So that builds basically a sentence. I'm going to go down 2 lines for good measure, just so you can see what's happening. I'm going to do one more thing. This is a command called output.inner HTML, capital HTML, has to match exactly. So this is basically saying, I want you to generate inner HTML, I want you to generate HTML for a variable called output, which is this guy, which is associated with the ID who passes. So basically I'm creating what's going to go inside that ID. And what do I want to put there? I want to put that sentence that I just made called person passing. So this should generate HTML inside this ID right here. And that's all going to happen when the user clicks this button. So I have to save this. I made changes. I'm going to go back to my browser and I'm going to refresh. It's not going to really look a whole lot different, but I can see there's going to be stuff going on. So I'm going to type in my name. Say my name is Sally. I wonder if I can enlarge this a little bit. There we go. Say my name is Sally, and I'm going to click change person, and it says who passed cells class? Sally, that's who. So it generates that output for me inside that ID. So this is a very, very, very simple JavaScript file inside HTML. So there's a lot of steps here where you're being introduced to some basic HTML. You're being introduced to how JavaScript files are stored inside HTML. And then there's another video on how to show you how to do comments in HTML, which is important because I'm going to expect your projects to include comments identifying your work as you. So you need to know how to do that. But this is a basic example just to get us started in doing some JavaScript inside HTML.